My name is Helen. I am 67 years old. Throughout my life I have seen and experienced many things, but this pain that I carry inside is one of the greatest blows I've ever endured. Let me share my story with you. I married my husband Robert 40 years ago. Robert was a man everyone in our town admired, successful in his work, respected by his peers, and devoted to his family. Or so I thought. For years, I believed I had found peace by his side, a husband who loved and protected me. But I learned that appearances can be deceiving. Everything began 2 years ago. Robert had retired. Our children were grown, married, and had their own families. We were spending our days tending to our garden, catching up with old friends and living a simple life, or at least that's what I believed. Robert started acting strangely. He would always carry his phone with him, never letting it out of his sight. Breakfasts that used to be filled with conversation were now quiet as he sat engrossed in his phone. I didn't want to believe anything was wrong. He's getting older, I told myself. Maybe he was tired, or perhaps he had things on his mind. But then things started getting even stranger. One day, while washing his clothes, I found a note in the pocket of his jacket. On it was a phone number and the name Samantha. At first, I didn't know what to make of it. Who is Samantha? I wondered. Maybe it was a colleague or someone he worked with, but deep down, something didn't feel right. That name, that note. I couldn't sleep that night. It took me back to when Robert and I first met. It was at a town festival. He was young, confident, and so charming. I remember the first time he held my hand, how safe and loved I felt. A few months later, he proposed, holding a bouquet of daisies, saying, "Helen, I want to spend my life with you." My heart was full of joy then. But now, were all those promises just illusions? The next day, Robert once again retreated to the bedroom with his phone. I quietly crept up to the door and listened. He was speaking in a hushed tone. "Don't worry, soon everything will get easier," he said. My heart was pounding. Something was definitely wrong. But how could I confront him? What if I was mistaken? Or worse, what if he really was betraying me? These thoughts consumed me for days, but eventually I gathered the courage to ask him. Over dinner that evening, I looked him in the eyes and softly asked, "Robert, I found a note in your jacket. It has a phone number and the name Samantha. Who is she?" His face tensed immediately. His eyebrow twitched and he avoided my gaze. "Oh, her? Just someone I worked with," he said. But I could hear the tremor in his voice. He wasn't telling the truth. I didn't push further out of fear of what I might discover. But the doubt grew inside me. I began to quietly observe him. One day, he told me he was going into town to meet some friends for coffee. I decided to follow him. When he arrived in the city, he walked into a cafe. From a distance, I watched as he sat down with a young woman. They were laughing, and she was touching his arm. He looked happy, too happy. My heart shattered. I felt as if a volcano had erupted within me. I wanted to storm in and confront them both, but my legs wouldn't move. I sat outside, tears streaming down my face. It's hard to describe the pain of seeing your life crumble before your eyes. When I returned home, I didn't know what to do. How could I carry this secret? How could I confront Robert? I cried for days, but eventually I decided to tell him everything. "Robert," I said, "why? Why did you do this?" At first, he denied it. But when he saw the determination in my eyes, he confessed. "Yes," he said, "there is someone named Samantha, but she's just a friend. I didn't want to lie to you, Helen, but sometimes I felt lonely." Anger surged through me. Lonely? What was I, Robert? What have I been to you all these years? I demanded. He remained silent, unable to meet my gaze. That night I stayed awake, replaying everything in my mind. How could he betray me like this? Yes, we had been married for years. Maybe the excitement had faded for him. But what had I done to deserve this? The question haunted me. Robert claimed he had ended things with Samantha and begged for my forgiveness. But the wound he left was too deep. Every time I looked at him, I saw them together in that cafe. One day, my grandchildren came to visit. Their laughter filled the house, bringing a rare sense of joy. As I held them close, I realized something. Life goes on. I looked at Robert and said, "Maybe this is why I'm still here." He said nothing, but I saw a glimmer of regret in his eyes. It wasn't enough, but it brought me a small comfort. Today I still live with Robert, but trust doesn't come easily anymore. Everything left a scar. Yet I've learned to draw strength from that pain. Now I focus on myself. I tend to my garden, spend time with my grandchildren, and find solace in small joys, but the hurt remains. One day, a neighbor, Margaret, said something that stayed with me. "Helen, people make mistakes, but sometimes their efforts to make amends say more than their faults." Those words made me think. Robert's quiet gestures, like making me tea in the morning or fixing things in the house, were they acts of guilt, or was he genuinely trying to change? We took a walk one afternoon, and for the first time in months, he spoke openly. "Helen," he began, "I need to tell you something. I've realized how much I took you for granted. I don't know if I can make up for it, but I am truly sorry." His tears softened a small part of my heart. But moving on wasn't easy. One night I dreamt of Samantha. She was young and beautiful. She looked at me and said, "Robert loves you, but you've forgotten to love yourself." When I woke up, I realized there was truth in that. For years, I had been a wife, a mother, a grandmother, but I had forgotten to be Helen. From that day forward, I started rebuilding my life. I joined a book club with my neighbors. I expanded my garden and started selling produce at the local farmers market. I spent more time with my grandchildren. Robert remained a part of my life, but I no longer centered my world around him. Perhaps life is a constant test. I've faced mine, and now my only wish is that no one else endures the pain I've felt. But if they do, I hope they find a way out, just as I did. Because life, despite everything, goes on.